Hello, this is going to be a video responding to Second Thought's video on authoritarianism and why he fundamentally does not understand the concept. Either he doesn't actually understand it or he just likes to lie. It doesn't really matter which one it is, as with Second Thought, you never know. Because Second Thought really likes to be disingenuous. So let's see what our favorite tanky JT has to say.
Authoritarianism, the practice of eating only people who have
This is already poisoning the well. I'm going to explain why, but let me finish.
published books.
So, because he did that joke definition, he's basically already priming you to think that the concept is redundant. Right? That joke was placed there to psychologically make you already agree with him from the start. That's why that joke was placed there. I know how he does things. He's a very deliberate person.
Wait, that's not right. Authoritarianism.
See his irony? Again, he's priming you to agree with him.
Truly one of the words of all time.
Yes, because it describes a political system where the state has absolute power over you, where there's no private life of the citizen, where the citizen has no say. That's what it means. God damn it.
A decadent 7 syllables long and wonderfully
It's not vague. Second Thought. It's not vague. Authoritarianism is where the entity, usually a government, controls the state, controls the citizen, right? And forces them to obey authority. Like, the root word for authoritarianism is authority. God damn it, JT.
vague. If you've ever had a conversation about politics, and if you're watching this channel, I'm sure you have, you've likely heard someone use the term, or maybe you've even used it yourself. It's popular in pretty much every corner of the mainstream political spectrum. Liberals, conservatives, the dreaded centrists, and even some lefty groups like anarchists and
I'm a market socialist, which JT would consider an anarchist. For a JT, anarchist or a libertarian socialist is anyone who doesn't agree with his tanky views. You'll see.
and libertarian socialists. But what does it mean? And what gives it so much weight in the political discourse?
Because it's a deplorable form of government. That's why.
Well, that's what this video is about. We've got a pretty poor understanding of what authority is here in the West, but I bet we can fix that. Let's start with the generally accepted definition. Authoritarianism, favoring or enforcing strict obedience to authority, especially that of the government, at the expense of personal freedom. Okay, this is a pretty bad definition.
That's true, though. It is the... What do you mean it's a bad definition? JT, how is it a bad definition? You lose your rights and you have to listen to a government. No personal freedoms. That's what it means. It's not vague at all, JT.
Definition, if we're being honest. It mentions the government in there, but doesn't really commit to being political.
Yes, it does commit to being political. What do you mean, JT? Oh my god.
Just kinda, when you want people to follow the rules.
No, that's not what it says. It says... Let's read it together.
But doesn't really commit to being bad definition, if we're being at the expense of personal freedom.
See? Even you know what it means. That's exactly at the expense of personal freedoms. Following the rules doesn't necessarily have to be at the expense of personal freedoms. If following the rules was what authoritarianism meant, every country in the world would be authoritarian. JT, come on. You read the definition, then you poison the well by actually ignoring what you just read, hoping people who watch will ignore your rampant, disingenuous well poisoning.
Okay, this is a pretty bad definition, if we're being honest.
No, it's not.
It mentions the government in there, but doesn't really commit to being political, just kinda, when you want people to follow the rules. That's not super helpful when we're trying to nail down a heavily used term, and one that deals with some serious topics. Okay, so what if we expand it to include how people generally use the term? Generally speaking, when someone uses the word authoritarian, they are often, but not always, using it as a term to demonize a system that is different from their own.
Not quite, JT, because you see, authoritarian is usually a deplorable form of government where you have no personal freedoms. And yes, we should demonize the type of governments where you have no personal freedom, JT. What do you mean?
Regardless of the facts. They're using it as a synonym for totalitarian, a word you don't really hear much anymore.
Okay, so let's explain the difference between a authoritarian state and a totalitarian state. Because there is actually a difference semantically how the words are used. Even though the actual definition of authoritarian and totalitarian is the same, the actual underlying difference that is semantic and politically charged is as follows. Totalitarian is usually referring to a military junta, okay? Usually referring to a military junta or a monarchist, absolutist monarchist system that is centered around one person. Authoritarianism is a more general definition for a system that breaks human rights, but totalitarianism usually refers to a military junta or an absolutist monarchy. Okay, JT, thank you. You see, you can't provide context on the words you use. I can.
It's sort of fallen by the wayside in favor of authoritarian. Kind of like using the word commie as a slur has been superseded by tanky in the last few years.
What? No, so a tanky, JT, okay? A tanky is a person who defends China, North Korea, Turkmenistan. A tanky originated in the British left wing in 1956, okay? When for the leftists who approved of the Soviet invasion of Hungary. But the term now refers to something else. It refers to people who do apologetics for China, North Korea, and the USSR. Kind of like you, JT. A tanky is mostly a fascist masquerading as a leftist. If you look at it, the points are the same. For example, a tanky will say that the word tanky has lost its meaning, just like our good friend JT over here. Just like a fascist, right? A right-wing fascist, their favorite point is to say that the word Nazi, if you know what I mean, has lost its meaning and it's not relevant anymore. They are literally using the same arguments as literal fascists.
Yeah. Same idea, different era. Both of these words, authoritarian and totalitarian, have been leveled at fascism and communism, often in a direct attempt to conflate the two.
So they have never been levied at communism because communism is a utopic system. Okay, I'm a socialist, not a communist, but there has never been a working socialist state. So they haven't been levied at socialism, they have been levied at state capitalism, which is not real socialism, which I would think for an educated, a very educated leftist like yourself, you would probably know that, right? Because all quote-unquote socialist nations devolved into dictatorships where freedoms were destroyed, right? Where people were put in labor camps, starved and deported. There has never been a true socialist nation. You know that.
This is largely due to the US's extreme anti-communism post-World War II, to the point that they'd lump in their former friends, the people without whom the Allies could not have won the war.
Okay, so let's talk about the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact because JT over here apparently doesn't know about it. So, the Soviets only entered the war against the Germans because the Germans invaded them. Actually, the Soviets were basically on the side of the Germans and they had a secret pact of dividing up Europe. If you didn't know, that's what the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact meant. That's what it was. It was a pact they had for carving up Europe. And the only reason Stalin joined against Hitler is because of Operation Barbarossa. Also, the USSR joined in the Allies and scorched the earth, right? I can tell you about the atrocities they did in my country. They were deplorable, man. Deporting people to the Siberian taiga to die, the gulags, the Holodomor in the 30s, and just because they fucking helped the Allies win a war, which again, they only joined because the Germans attacked them, because if the Germans hadn't attacked them, they would never have joined, because they were on the side of Nazi Germany, okay? God damn it, JT. I know you know about this.
with what most people believe to be the greatest evil in history. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's all well and good. People use a political term vaguely to demonize their opponents.
It's not vague. We very well know what we mean when we say authoritarian. Why are you trying to keep going on this line of, oh, it's a vague word, oh, poor old me? No, JT, we very well know. You showed the definition in dictionary of authoritarian, and I agree with the definition you showed. But then you said it's a bad definition. Why are you lying to our faces, JT? Why?
Surprise. But we still need some specifics. What exactly makes a state authoritarian? Well, if you have a scroll through the comments of just about any political video that talks about socialism, you'll find people ready with their pre-written list of objections, usually bundled under the prime objection, that's authoritarian.
So, socialism does not have to be authoritarian, okay? Right-wingers who say socialism is authoritarian, yes, they are not right. But all the quote-unquote socialist nations, states and experiments, whatever you want to call them, are authoritarian, totalitarian states. And you know that, JT. And all those comments are on probably because you're a tanky and because people smell your bullshit. That's why. Because you don't talk about genuine socialism. You talk about Marxism, Leninism, which is a red fascism.
Things on that list include the existence of large prisons or labor camps, a covert police force.
You're doing good. You're doing good so far.
State media, a strongman leader, censorship, that sort of thing. And to be fair, all those things do sound scary, and none of them are ideal.
Yes, they're not ideal, but why do you always like to defend countries that have them, such as China and the USSR? Why, if they're not ideal?
I think we can all agree that we'd love to live in a society where prisons didn't need to exist. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before we go any further, I want to emphasize that I'm not trying to attack anyone here.
Except for that you are clearly trying to insult our intelligence so fucking much.
The objection to authoritarianism is present in a lot of different camps. People may define it a little differently. For example, a libertarian might call seatbelt laws authoritarian, while a liberal might consider the influence of the church on the government authoritarian. Meanwhile, my anarchist friends are yelling from the back of the room that the very existence of a state is authoritarian and we need to abolish bedtime.
I'm not
Again,
laughing.
Teasing, no offense intended. Okay, we all on the same page? Authoritarianism is a red flag.
See how he's trying to be relatable? See how he's making jokes?
For a lot of people, and there are some specific objections we can consider. So, let's consider them. Here's what we're going to do for the rest of the video. First, we'll look at the list of objections as understood by liberals. And I mean that in the broadest sense. Liberals as in subjects of liberal states, not in the conservative versus liberal sense. Then we'll look at those same objections as understood by the left.
What he means by liberal is probably more moderate leftist, such as a social democrat or a market socialist. What he means by leftist is probably a tanky. We'll see.
Again, pretty broadly speaking. Basically everyone from social democrats and beyond. Then finally, we'll consider a better way to understand authority and authoritarianism.
By a better way, he's going to read us on authority, probably. Okay, he's going to read to us on authority, like they always do. And he's going to say, look, Engels wrote this, so it must be right. On authority is laughable. It's shit. I already know he's going to read on authority to us. I bet on it.
Sound good? All right, liberal friends. I've got a pretty good idea of the kinds of places you feel are authoritarian. Top of the list, Soviet Union, the big one. Perhaps the target of the most intense smear campaign in history.
Okay, let's unpack this. The Soviet Union was very authoritarian under Stalin, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, and Lenin. It was very authoritarian. First of all, the purges, the great purges, all the Trotsky and his sympathizers that were purged in the 30s by Stalin, the Holodomor that was done against Ukrainians in the 30s, which was artificial murder and starvation, the deportation into the Siberian taiga that was done to the occupied territories in World War II, and the millions of people that died, the millions of people that died in the Gulag labor camps, okay, the heavy Russification of the Soviet countries and the remaining consequences of Russification of this. I know you've never been to a post-Soviet country because you're not from one, and it's very easy for you to talk. I can talk, okay? The heavy Russification that was done, the absolute destruction of culture, the destruction of cities, towns, the aggressive taking away of our homes, the R-wording of Russian soldiers, like Russian soldiers R-worded women everywhere they passed through. So yes, I think the Soviet Union deserves, okay, it deserves the bad reputation it has. I think it's very deserved.
Then we've got Cuba, China, North Korea, and likely a handful of other projects. But I think it's safe to say that these are the big ones.
Yes, so China now. China is horrible. Like the Cultural Revolution, the starvation, the murder in the streets of children that happened then, and what happens today, the social credit, the heavy surveillance apparatus, the black bagging, like they grab you, put you in a van and fucking kill you, okay, for criticizing the government, yes. And Cuba, where you live with $28 a year. North Korea, where you are malnourished, yes, I would say these countries are pretty bad.
When you look at any of these projects, it's not difficult to see the one thing they all have in common. They're all socialist. And when you...
No. I expected more from him. He's apparently just gonna say it, that they're socialist, although they were not socialist. They were state capitalist or militarist capitalist. They were deplorable human rights abusing systems. They were very close to the Nazis. Okay.
You see this, it's not entirely unreasonable to come to the conclusion that authoritarianism is a core feature of socialism.
No one comes to that conclusion except for right-wingers. But you know what is authoritarianism? Is a core element of Marxism-Leninism, not of socialism.
We'll address this a bit more thoroughly in a few minutes, but suffice it to say that in the West, we may have a slightly biased opinion on the matter, through no fault of our own. We've just been subjected to nearly 100 years of Red Scare propaganda at this point.
Oh my god. So the Red Scare was horrible. I agree, the Red Scare was very bad against genuine leftists, but the Red Scare is fucking over. And also, you don't really need to lie about the USSR or North Korea to make them look bad, because they already are bad. That's the thing. You don't need to lie about these things to make them sound bad.
Everything we're taught growing up in the imperial core, especially in the US, points us towards the conclusion that communism is evil and capitalism is righteous.
So this is true. The US does have a very weird obsession with capitalism. But you can't use that to defend China and North Korea. That's the problem. You are saying an ounce of truth, so that a leftist would probably agree with you, but you are, what can I say this? You are wrapping your shit takes in some truth so that you can basically convert people to your red fascism. I know what you're doing.
But here's the part where I'm going to have to ask you to be willing to consider some unpleasant truths. And I don't say these things to engage in whataboutism or because I'm anti-American or something.
Hey, I'm anti-American too. That doesn't mean I support every non-American country, kind of like you. And also, whataboutism is exactly what you're going to do. He's going to do whataboutism. That's exactly what he'll do for the remainder of the video. I've seen this shit. He's going to do so much whataboutism. He's literally just lying to us.
Quite the contrary. I believe that in order for any country to live up to the standards it sets for others, it needs to soberly reflect on the facts. And the facts indicate that everything we're taught about these awful authoritarian socialist countries
is true.
We are also guilty of.
That's not true. He's going to equate plainclothes police officers with the Gestapo.
And often to a far greater degree. Let me elaborate. One thing that rarely gets the attention it deserves is how we talk about authoritarianism. And I mean that literally, like the very words we use. Take the DPRK.
Take North Korea.
We never hear about the government of North Korea. We hear about the Kim regime. This is common.
Because that's exactly what it is. They are a regime. A regime is usually a dictatorial, absolutist monarchy. And they are a monarchy. If you look, Kim Il-sung, the father of Kim Jong-il, who is the father of Kim Jong-un, it's literally a monarchy with the fucking family. They literally have a nobility, as their class system is organized into loyalty classes, and you can't really move between the classes. So they literally have a nobility and a monarchy. So yeah, they are a regime. They are a regime. Second thought.
And when Westerners talk about non-capitalist governments, or even capitalist ones that aren't vassal states of the US. They have a regime, we and our allies have a government. The way we talk about different systems
That's true, because a government is usually a more like legitimate, right? A regime usually tries to like convey that it's not a legitimate form of governance that's happening there. A government is usually legitimate, and I'm sorry, North Korea is a fucking regime. It's a horrible, horrible place.
Goes a long way towards coloring our perception of them. People criticize labor camps, or secret police, or any number of other scary authoritarian words. But here's the thing, we have those too. And if you look at the data, often to a far greater extent than any socialist project in history. We just don't call them.
He's just lying. He's going to equivocate plainclothes police officers with the Gestapo.
Them by those names. We don't have secret police, we have plainclothes officers.
Okay, he did it. Okay. First of all, plainclothes police officers are just there to observe, so that if a crime happens, they can catch you. Secret police would watch you what you are doing and black bag you in a black van and kill you in China, or in older socialist states, put you into a labor camp and torture you and extract fake confessions out of you. The secret police was all over the place. They were everywhere. They were listening everywhere. Anyone could be secret police. It is very different. And also, the social credit system in China right now, where a camera sees you doing something, in 2 minutes the van is there to black bag and kill you in the van. Because there are so many black baggings, they are now using vans and killing you in the van because it's more efficient. Do you understand what you're talking about? How can you equivocate plainclothes police officers with the fucking secret police?
Or the intelligence community. We don't have gulags, we have detention centers.
My God. So in American detention centers, it is estimated that about 400,000 to 500,000 people died. American immigrant detention centers are horrible, where immigrants are being held. I agree, they are horrible, but the gulags are much more horrible. The thing is that the population of the USSR was about 40, 50, 60 million, like about 100 million, right? It was about there. And how many people died in Stalin's gulags? About 3 to 4 million. And if you adjust that to population, US has 400 something people today, and only 400 people died. It's literally a staggering differential, even normally. But if you adjust for population, the death toll is even greater. It is estimated that he killed about 15% of his own citizens. And also all the war crimes in World War II that were committed in the Soviet Union. Also, the labor camps that exist today in North Korea that are estimated to kill thousands a year, where 3 generations of your family will go. A gulag and a detention center are very different.
Which, by the way, house far more inmates than the Soviet Union ever did.
Yes, because the population is also larger, but if you adjust for population, the Soviet Union had way worse death toll. Yes, they had less people in the gulags because they were fucking dying.
And of course, we don't have slave labor, we have penal labor.
Penal labor is horrible. Penal labor is horrible. I agree. But compared to actual slave labor that happens in African countries, in North Korea, in Turkmenistan, in Iran, in China, okay, all the sweatshops, like penal labor compared to sweatshops where children work, they're very different, okay? Even penal labor is deplorable, but there is a difference there.
We put inmates to work manufacturing hand sanitizer during a pandemic or fighting fires because enshrined in the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, slavery is illegal.
Yeah, the 13th Amendment in the US is very weird. I agree. The 13th Amendment is deplorable. The loophole that is enshrined within the 13th is horrible. I agree.
Legal except as punishment for a crime. And a lot of the time, that crime is just being poor. A parking ticket you couldn't pay. Getting caught with the same drug a rich person.
No one gets jailed for a parking ticket, but the drug thing, so the drug thing is true. I will now go on a tangent. So, second thought is actually right here about the drug thing. I never expected to agree with second thought, but fun fact, in the war on drugs in the US in the 70s and 80s, crack and coke are pharmaceutically equal, right? But coke was predominantly used by rich white people, while crack was predominantly used by poor black people. And so the punishment for crack was about like 5 times greater than the punishment for coke for the same amount, and a pharmaceutically equivalent thing. So yes, I agree with second thought here. He's right about this part.
Uses, but you don't have the money to buy yourself out of trouble. We don't have a Ministry of War, we have a Department of Defense.
Hey, every country has a Department of Defense. We all know what it's made for, but all countries call it a Department of Defense.
Despite never once fighting a defensive war.
You know, it's a semantics thing, you know.
Every military action taken by the United States, from bombing hospitals to drone striking foreign citizens.
It's horrible, I agree. So what the US does is horrible, but we can condemn the US and we can also condemn your quote-unquote socialist states.
Is given the cover of defense. We don't have state media or propaganda, we just have news. Those news outlets are, of course, all owned by the same corporate interests who funnel millions of dollars a year into government pockets to make sure their profits are secure, and their anchors dutifully repeat the ruling.
So there's a difference between what happens in Western countries with this state media, like the media that is funded by billionaires, because you have multiple types of media, right? There are multiple outlets that usually have a different outlook, and there are also very reputable outlets such as Associated Press, AP, which are very good. They are very unbiased, right? In a quote-unquote socialist country, you are not going to find any thing. All outlets are going to say the same state-sanctioned thing. There's a difference between state media and billionaire-sponsored media, and both are kind of bad, but state media is worse as it only has one narrative and opinion, while media in Western countries usually have more narratives and more opinions. In Western countries, if you are a journalist and you say something, you are not getting black-bagged and murdered. Okay, kind of like in China, for example, where if journalists try to say anything, even send a little text message, they turn up or either dead the next day or confessing while clearly being tortured to treason. There's a difference here, JT.
Class's ideological positions.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
I could make a clip like this only using Chinese media. I kind of fucking want to now.
Democracy.
Their guys are
I'm just gonna look for all of the RT subsidiaries and make a clip.
dictators, ours are presidents.
Because yes, their guys are dictators and ours are presidents. Because in the USSR, for example, you couldn't elect for shit. You had one candidate on the ballot that was already chosen. In China, it's the same. You have one candidate on the ballot. While in Western countries, you usually have more candidates, and you can actually elect your president who doesn't have all the power. There are the branches of government, right? Executive, legislative, and judiciary branches of government, right? Which most totalitarian states don't really have, and are centered, for example, around the executive usually. Or the legislature. Like, it's different. There are oligarchical totalitarians, there are personal totalitarian states. But yes, they are dictators and ours are presidents because we can elect them and they don't have unchecked power.
Their state has a regime, ours has a government. We are free.
I already debunked this, so I'm not gonna.
And happy, they're oppressed and miserable.
They are. Look at the stats for China, how starving they are, man. The children working in sweatshops, the dystopian look of cities, those crumbling apartment buildings that were built not very well, the black bagging for saying anything critical. You are getting black bagged for saying anything. You are not going to get black bagged in the West. JT.
Our nuclear arsenal is for deterrence. Theirs,
I agree, nukes are horrible. Nukes are horrible, horrible stuff. But they threaten to nuke more than the West does.
is a threat to global peace, despite the US being the only country on Earth to have ever used nuclear weapons. And we did it twice, on civilians, on purpose. We have a democracy, they have a dictatorship, despite by all accounts places like Cuba and China having far more representation.
Citation needed. JT, my good friend JT, how can you say such a thing? Most Western countries are democratic. You can elect your parliament and your president. Yes, I agree. There are a lot of interests, but China has a forever president. Cuba too. There is no democratic process. There's one candidate on the ballot. If you try to make a campaign as an independent, you just can't in China or Cuba. If you try to advocate against the candidate on the ballot, you get black bagged. So yes, they don't have more democracy. They are a dictatorship.
And opportunity for democratic involvement than places like the US. So the way we talk
No, they don't.
about government structures, characteristics, and actions matters. Without even knowing it, we can end up falling prey to some very subtle, very sophisticated propaganda that
Oh, hey, look at this. So very subtle and sophisticated propaganda is exactly what you're doing. Because for most lay people, what you are doing would be interesting. Most lay people would probably believe you, JT, which is a shame. You could probably turn a lot of people over to Marxism, Leninism, who aren't very informed. The only one here who is doing propaganda is you, JT. You are just lying so much here.
primes us to hate people we've never met, whose economic and government structures we know nothing about. And
Yes, most lay people don't. I do. Unfortunately for you, so I can debunk you.
with whom we share far more in common than we do with our own leaders. Okay, fine, but those are just words. Who cares what we call our stuff? All right, let's talk specifics. In a striking 2012 article by Adam Gopnik called The Caging of America, the author notes that, quote, overall, there are now more people under correctional supervision in America, more than 6 million, than were in the Gulag under Stalin at its height. And this is coming from an American writer with a thoroughly liberal worldview.
That's true, because if you adjust for population, as the USSR had about 70 to 80 to 100 million population, I leave a link with the population of the USSR at that time, as I don't remember it off the top of my head. But they had about 3 to 4 million in the gulags, out of which 2 to 3 million were dying, okay? So if you adjust for population density at that time in the world, more people died in the gulag than in correctional facilities. In correctional facilities, less people died. Even if you don't adjust for population, less people died, literally. And if you adjust for population, it's even worse, not including the Holodomor and the war crimes. You are just selectively picking data here. He's not going to mention how many people were under Stalin, because if he does, you are going to be able to actually do population density calculations. That's why he doesn't mention it.
It's a poignant comparison because, as we all know, Stalin, gulags, and the Soviet Union are the trifecta of what the average person sees as authoritarianism. The fact
Because they are deplorable stuff.
that we're doing worse than that, even if you buy the
We are not doing worse than that.
inflated numbers of widely debunked books like the Black Book of
The Black Book of Communism is weird, but 3 to 4 million is not inflated.
Communism should tell you something. And fun fact, the CIA wrote a report in the 50s that the whole Stalin strongman thing was largely a myth. It was just a very useful myth to the capitalist powers, so why not perpetuate it?
That's a lie. The CIA never wrote that. Stalin was a dictator, a horrible, horrible dictator, and he just lied to us right now. I don't like his lies.
But I know what you're thinking.
He's not gonna show it, is it? Because he doesn't exist.
Everybody knows the US has a thing for prisons. That's like one thing we could ease back on a little bit. That doesn't make the country authoritarian. Let's continue then. How about surveillance? It's pretty widely believed that citizens of socialist states are the subject of extreme surveillance. But what if I told you that none of them hold a candle to the US? Don't believe me?
They do now. China does. China has more surveillance than the US, much more sophisticated surveillance with more cameras than people. And China has 1 billion people, and they have more cameras than people. They have very good AI identification system, biometrics. They can catch you, like you do something, a camera sees you, in an hour you're black bag. Their surveillance is much worse than Western surveillance, which is bad, yes, but Chinese surveillance is stronger.
Take a look at Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Thanks to this piece of legislation, every single person in the United States is the subject of incredibly intense scrutiny. We have a mass surveillance program that allows for the collection of phone conversations, text messages, emails, web searches, and social media messages. Everything you do is being monitored.
Yes, but is it used to come and black bag you? Yes, they do know all this information, which isn't ideal. But they don't use it to black bag you, right? They don't use this information to come and murder you and your family. They don't. But China does. The USSR used to.
But wait, it's called the Foreign Surveillance Act, so why are we in the crosshairs?
Irrelevant.
Well, it started out as a way to keep tabs on communications between US citizens and foreign nationals deemed a threat of some kind. But over the last decade or so, the scope of the project has expanded dramatically. What was once strictly a counterterrorism tool, which is already incredibly vague and dangerous, has now morphed into a domestic surveillance apparatus where the NSA provides this data to the CIA and the FBI, which they can use to open investigations into any person in the country without a warrant. But what if we want to give US...
Hey, in China, they can just come and they don't need a warrant to murder you. They can just come, take you and murder you, and you never existed, right? If anyone says, oh, why did you murder? They are also getting murdered. Doesn't matter. Yeah, okay, you said anything? Okay, they come murder you. Pack, that's over. It's over. Bye. You have no rights in China, okay? Which is a country you really like to defend, but apparently when the US uses surveillance is banned, which I agree, US surveillance is banned. I'm a very big proponent for open source shit, but US surveillance doesn't black bag you and murder you for saying things against the government.
Intelligence agencies the benefit of the doubt. They're just doing their job, right? If you're not a criminal, you have nothing to hide. According to a 2022 report,
that's kind of true because you're not gonna get murdered.
The FBI and CIA conduct millions of these backdoor searches for no legitimate reason. They've pulled data on family members, journalists, political commentators, even government officials. For what reason? Who knows? They want dirt on a politician they don't like, so they read their Twitter DMs. They saw you in a coffee shop and thought you were cute and asked the barista for your name. That's all.
Okay, so they see you in a coffee shop and ask the barista for your name. That doesn't happen. That's very fucking weird if it did. You know, in China, they see you say something, they come and murder you. It's very fucking different. And you're just right now using anecdotal evidence.
All they need. Some random intelligence creep can plug in your name, phone number, or email address and have access to years of your personal communications, web activity, address, personal...
Oh, the government knows my address. Oh shit! I didn't know the government knows where I live. The government can send me my bills. Oh no. What a shocker. The government knows where I live. Oh my god.
Details, all of it. No authoritarian regime in history has ever wielded that kind of
China does right now.
Surveillance power.
And also you have to adjust for history, because most authoritarian systems he's referring to, such as the USSR, were kind of fucking old, right? And in the 70s and 80s, the surveillance apparatus, like the technology wasn't there, but actually the KGB was the strongest secret police in the world. Like then, their apparatus was the best. Okay. Also, North Korea and Cuba are too poor to afford a surveillance apparatus like China. But even in the 70s and 80s and 60s and 50s, the surveillance apparatus in the USSR was very good. Most partisan groups were caught and murdered. Surveillance in quote-unquote socialist countries, it is much worse than it is in Western countries. Okay? I know you don't like that, but it's the fact, and we don't need to lie. GT, we shouldn't lie.
Okay, dystopian prison population, largest surveillance apparatus in history, that all sounds pretty bad. But at least we have the freedom to criticize the government, right? The secret police aren't gonna come drag us away. Well, I've got some bad news for you there, too. US police are the most vicious and unaccountable in the world by far.
Citation needed.
There are plenty of videos online of police arresting journalists, brutalizing peaceful protesters, even laughing about killing innocent people. I have a whole video on the subject, actually.
Yeah, so US police is pretty bad, but they are not murdering journalists. You can criticize the government however much you want in the US. Meanwhile, in China and other socialist, quote-unquote socialist countries you defend, if you say anything, the police, the quote-unquote police, which is actually unaccountable there, they can come murder you and nothing happens to them. At least in the US, they get judged and shit if they actually murder, right? In China, they can just come, murder, and nothing happens to them.
Actually. But here's the gist of it. According to ongoing reporting, US police kill over 1,000 American citizens.
Yeah, so the militarization of the police is very bad and concerning. China has the most vicious police in the world because they black bag you much worse than the US.
Per year. 1,000 people. And I can hear the objection already. Yeah, well, some of those people were probably criminals. Police are not meant to be judge, jury, and executioner.
I agree. Are secret police meant to be judge, jury, and executioner? Because about 5,000 black baggings a year is the actual real estimated number. And the thing is, that's not even a close number to the actual number of black baggings that actually happens. It's 5,000 reported black baggings a year that come from via reliable sources, but it is estimated to be double or even triple that in the entirety of China. They black bag anyone who says anything. Their police is judge, jury, and executioner. The death penalty is so rampant for minor crimes there, such as criticizing the government.
They're meant to arrest people if they have to, and then hand them over to the judge, jury, and we really should talk about the execution.
Yes, we really should. Countries like China have a death penalty, and also you later in this video are going to advocate for death penalty after a revolution. So don't be a hypocrite.
Executioner part. Open social media on any day of the week, and you'll see a story of an officer-involved shooting, where the media tries really hard to twist
Open social media every weekend, you're going to see Chinese black bagging
the reporting to make the cop sound less like a murderer. With body cameras often required these days, it's getting harder for them to hide their crimes, though they still try. Anyway, the bottom line is this. If we look at any other country on Earth, let's say China, the hot-button supposed authoritarian hellhole of the day, and we compare police violence stats, the US is far worse. In the US, in 2022, police killed 1,201 people. In China, that number is 0.
Wait, you really believe it? First of all, it is...
Oh, wait, nope, I read that wrong. 0 people killed by police since 2019.
Okay, so since 2019, the actual estimated number is about 50,000 people that were killed by police that were black bagged. Okay. JT, you are really going to believe the numbers that are coming from the authoritarian Chinese government? Oh my god, you're going so low. You're going to believe the numbers they make up. Of course, they're never going to say the truth. Of course. You need to look at independent, reliable sources, not what the government reports.
A year when 2 people were killed. 2 people in 5 years.
I don't believe him.
In a country with a population 4 times greater than the
He's fucking lying.
United States. Since 2019, US police have killed nearly 5,000 American citizens. So, we have a more dystopian prison situation, we're the most spied on people on Earth, and our police murder 3 people on average every single day. If
The Chinese average is about triple that.
that's not authoritarian, I don't know what is. And this isn't to run defense for the excesses of past and present socialist projects. In fact,
Yes, in fact, it is to run defense for them.
socialists are among the loudest and most well-read critics of these experiments.
That's not true. He's just lying. And yes, more leftists are usually well read and they usually critique excesses of the past. But he's not a leftist, he's a Marxist-Leninist, which isn't leftism.
Program Guys and I have a podcast episode specifically dedicated to the topic.
where you soy jack China like a little bitch, and where you say, oh my god, China's not that bad, come on. They all three of them are tankies.
We plan to do more in the future. The point of all this is that if we're going to rightly level criticism at some states, we need to make sure to apply that standard universally. And that means starting at
Hey, you should apply it universally, like onto China.
home rather than simply passing judgment on countries halfway around the world or that have long since passed. Okay, that's the liberal part taken care of. Now it's time to have a little chat with my friends on the Western left. The right does a very good job at presenting a unified front. The capitalist class
You should join the right because you talk like them.
and the forces of reaction are incredibly powerful in the imperial core. The left is already on the back foot, and we have been for many.
Yes, and you are dragging us back. Marxist-Leninists are one of the biggest thing dragging the left back. That's why I am reacting to you. That's why I'm combating. That's why I'm starting my journey on the internet, destroying you. Because Marxism, Leninism is the thing that is holding us back. Our ties to totalitarian governments, our ties to the USSR, and our ties to people like you are what is holding the left back. You need to be taken care of.
Many years. This is why it's frankly absurd how much infighting goes on among the left.
You are not true leftists, but everything does happen because you try to infiltrate our community.
Left. Social Democrats sniping at tankies for being
My fucking god! So I'm sniping at tankies, yes, because that's what you are. Because you're a red fascist who likes to defend genocide. For example, the genocide of the Uyghur people. He has a video where he tries to say that the Uyghur people aren't being genocide. I'll probably try to watch that and react to it. Next.
being authoritarian doesn't do the movement any good. Funnily enough, the label authoritarian is only ever applied to successful socialist projects. The ones that failed were somehow more pure. But
The same narrative as Hakim. Are they like sharing scripts or some shit?
the moment a new system takes steps to ensure the security of their people and their
Ensure the security of their people? Oppressing anyone that doesn't agree with them? Destroying art? Destroying historical buildings? Establishing a militarist government?
new project, they're labeled authoritarian. I think part of this is that there's a lack of understanding among Western self-professed leftists regarding what it actually takes to change the status quo across an entire country. Every revolution, including bourgeois revolutions like the American one, are authoritarian.
I told you he's going to go for the on authority bit. Let's see it.
By default. Those in power will never give up their power without a struggle. They're not going to let you vote out the very system that benefits them. To understand the nature of revolution a little better, let's go back to the man himself. No, the other one. His sugar daddy. There we go. Friedrich Engels. This large beard wrote a brilliant little piece called On Authority.
It's not brilliant, it's horrible. One of the things that he did, he was very bad at writing. It's one of the things that is holding the left back.
It's like a page long. None of you have any excuse not to read it. It's linked below. But here's the part that I think is most applicable to this video. Have these gentlemen ever seen a revolution? A revolution is certainly the most authoritarian thing there is. It is the act whereby one part of the population imposes its will upon the other part by means of rifles, bayonets, and cannon. Authoritarian means, if such there be at all. And if the victorious party does not want to have fought in vain, it must maintain this rule by means of the terror which its arms inspire in the reactionists. Would the Paris Commune have lasted a single day if it had not made use
Oh my god, so this is a horrible pamphlet that advocates for violence and repression. And this is what Marxism-Leninism is based on, a one-page pamphlet. Like, this is how weak their ideology is. They're based on a one-page pamphlet.
use of this authority of the armed people against the bourgeois? Should we not, on the contrary, reproach it for not having used it freely enough?
No, force is never ideal. Violence is never ideal. Quote-unquote socialist countries murder anyone who doesn't agree with the government, which isn't very leftist. Leftism should be built on progression and inclusion, not murder and destruction. The free marketplace of ideas should be a core thing in society.
Therefore, either one of two things. Either the anti-authoritarians don't know what they're talking about, in which case they are creating nothing but confusion, or they do know, and in that case they are betraying the movement of the proletariat. In either case, they serve the reaction. While it might not feel good to be called out from beyond,
this is not being called out. This is just you reading to me on Authority, which is the worst pamphlet ever created.
Beyond the grave, it's so important that we understand what Engels was talking about here, because it's still true today. If a mass of people decide they're done with the current oppressive system, rise up, build something new, and then fail to protect the gains they've made.
By protect, he means murder anyone who disagrees with them, destroy art, historical buildings, and deport people into a taiga, let them starve and make labor camps.
Their project will be destroyed. We've seen it many times throughout history.
This LARPy shit is horrible.
The reactionary elements.
He's a white guy from Wisconsin. He's a rich guy who owns a business and does reviews for luxury cars. He's not a leftist. He would never join any revolution. He would never change the system.
In society won't go away, and people with wealth and power before the revolution will still have that wealth, and will have likely fled somewhere like the US where they can agitate for military or CIA intervention. This was the case in Chile in
the Pinochet thing, yeah, that was nice. That was actually very, very horrible. So, the thing, I'm gonna explain it because I don't think he's gonna explain it in detail because the video is like kind of ending. But so there was this guy in Chile, I don't remember his name. He won the election and he was a socialist. He was a pretty good social democrat, and he wanted to establish a social democrat system in Chile. But because Chile was one of those so-called banana republics from where the US like to extract resources, and the new guy didn't want to let them extract resources, there was a coup and a neoliberal dictatorship of Pinochet established, and that was actually a very real example of the CIA intervening in a socialist nation.
1973, when the democratically elected socialist president Salvador Allende failed.
Oh, yeah, he said his name. So it's Salvador Allende, of the socialist guy. And the dictator that was established after the coup, he was Pinochet.
To take preventative measures to ensure the vicious reactionary class and their US-based co-conspirators couldn't undermine them. Long story short, the Chilean right wing launched a US-backed and US-funded coup to overthrow the government, eliminate Allende, and install a fascist military dictatorship that plunged the country into recession and suffering for decades. In order to avoid this happening, a budding socialist project, or heck, any project, requires
fucking murdering people. No, it doesn't.
Police, it requires the shutting down of reactionary outlets, the banning of certain kinds of speech. There's a reason Germany banned everything related to the Nazis, for example. It's because they
Why did you say that, JT? God damn it.
Wanted to keep that sentiment from spreading as much as
Now you're gonna ruin my chances of being monetized.
Possible. It requires an intelligence apparatus to listen for terrorist plots, which were all too common.
Terrorist plots, he means people that don't agree with the military junta.
Post-revolution. In East Germany, the reactionaries would routinely attempt to blow up civilian train line.
Yeah, that actually happened, although what also happened was people trying to blow out tunnels so they can escape to West Germany, and I don't know which one he refers to.
It requires prisons to keep
Also, the Gestapo was horrible.
These people off the
Also, you accuse the US of having very bad prisons, and now you say that a socialist society requires prisons where you keep the quote-unquote reactionaries.
Streets. And historically speaking, the socialists have been much better at using prisons for rehabilitation rather than just
But I can tell you some horror stories, JT. Can tell you some horror stories of people that were quote-unquote rehabilitated, basically broken psychologically and physically. All those millions that were tortured and killed. Is that rehabilitation? God fucking damn it, JT.
Packing human beings away to rot like we do in the US. These things may not be morally correct, but like it or not, they are necessary.
No, they are.
And that's something that every system has agreed on. I would love nothing more than to see an alternative work, but it never has. Maybe one day I'll be proven wrong. That would be amazing. But to the people who believe it is possible, you need to ask yourself how it's going to happen. We've seen what the people in Tsarist Russia had to do.
From a Marxist perspective, JT, you're a rich guy who reviews luxury cars. You are not a member of the proletariat.
We've seen what the Cubans had to do. We've seen what the Vietnamese had to do. What
I can't stand him anymore.
the Chinese had to do. What
Trying to LARP as a fucking leftist revolutionary while staying in his fucking huge suburban house with his luxury cars.
the Americans had to
He's not a member of the proletariat from any sort of Marxist perspective.
do to separate from the British. Your anti-authoritarianism, while I genuinely believe it comes from a good place, is
Can you shut the fuck up?
handing an easy victory to the capitalist regime. They want you to play by their rules.
Oh, hey, he said regime. Hypocrite. The hypocrite said regime.
It's their game. You play by their rules, you lose. End of story. One final thing that's important to note is that this anti-authoritarian stance is very much a Western thing. And I think the reason for that is that we here in the Imperial Core
Why are you racist?
are in a very privileged position.
Yes, we are. That's why we can be more educated and not fucking stand the governments that are keeping the people oppressed. We shouldn't. We shouldn't stand the governments that are keeping people oppressed, kind of like you do.
We can hold these naive beliefs because we don't have any skin in
Naive believes my ass.
the game. We're not the ones under the boot. We're not
Yeah, well, you are supporting the governments that keep people under the boot.
the ones whose resources are being extracted, or whose homes are being bombed, or whose cities are being occupied by armed invaders in the name of freedom and democracy. We have the luxury of condemning others because we've never been on the receiving end.
Oh my fucking god, man. Why is he so much of a hypocrite? Doesn't he listen to himself how much of a hypocrite he is right now?
Think for just a moment what it would be like if your neighborhood was occupied by a foreign military force, doing unspeakable things to your friends and loved ones, taking your belongings, burning homes, torturing people in the name of national security. What means would you resort to in that situation?
I don't know, but you would never have that happen to you since you're a rich guy in the US that reviews cars. Oh my fucking...
I can't answer that for you, but it's something to think about. I know this has been kind of a heavy video, and for a lot of you, I'm sure this is the first time you've been asked to look at your home country more critically.
No, it's not.
If you're interested in learning more about any of the stuff we've talked about,
I'm from a post-Soviet poor-ass shit country.
there are links
I probably have more fucking things to say about the USSR and its scars than you from the fucking US. The only privileged one here is you, man.
in the description.
Oh, fucking...
We all have a responsibility to choose our words carefully, apply labels correctly, and hold our own nations to the same standard we expect others to meet. Maybe it's time we retire the word authoritarian and try to engage with the facts more precisely, more honestly, and in good faith. This is a really interesting topic when you dig into it, and as you might expect, vaguely using words like authoritarian isn't just a problem in one corner of the political arena. So I just wanted to take a second to show you how prevalent that vague language is even among mainstream news outlets, with today's sponsor, Ground News. Here we
Never mind, I don't want to listen to him plugging Ground News. We're just gonna end it here. Okay. So yeah, you've seen how genuine he is, how horrible his takes are, just like his buddy Hakim. They're both the same. They're deplorable. They're deplorable. They like to do whataboutism. They're very bad people in my opinion. So yeah. Okay, bye.